Hi, and welcome to the And One podcast. I am your host, Alex West, and we are almost to the regular season, 15 days away. Today, I'm joined by my guest, Corban Ford. Corban and I talk about the tiers of the NBA behind the Golden State Warriors, the teams that we think are competitive. This is actually a two-parter. We ran on a little bit longer than we thought we were going to. So the first part, the part that released today, we did about the first 6 teams that are competitive with the Golden State Warriors. Later in the week, probably Thursday or Friday, we're going to do the next 6 or 7. So it should be a good encapsulating view of what the league is going to be this year. Anyway, hope you listen to both parts of that. I'll let you know on Twitter when the second one comes out. But until then, here's the first part. So Brent, take us away. Joined today by my guest, Corban Ford. What up, Corban?
Hey, how you doing, man? Thanks for having me on.
Man, we're always glad to have you on the show. Today we are discussing a topic that I think we just spent like 45 minutes in pre-show talking about. But we're going to do our NBA tiers list. So we got our top tier. We got our top 4 tiers because after that it doesn't really matter. But we did our tiers, and you feel pretty good about this?
Hey, I'm all set. I feel pretty confident in this. It's going to be good to talk about.
All right, so let's just jump right in there and talk about Tier 1 is pretty cut and dry. Tier 1 is the Golden State Warriors all by themselves. There's nobody else even threatening them right now. I mean, they're the odds-on favorite to win the title. They, I think, improved. Is there any discussion to be had there besides adding any team besides Golden State to the top tier?
I'm with you. Golden State's in a class of their own. Just deep bench, versatile roster. You can't mess with their starting 5, their death lineup. I'm all with you. I really don't think there's a team right on their level.
And I think they kind of got better this offseason. I mean, a lot of people are saying that. I think adding Omri Caspi and adding Nick Young gives them a little bit more shooting, something that they had bench lineups that weren't really super great shooters. And I think this is going to give them a little something extra that they didn't have last year when it comes to playing these bench lineups.
I agree. I was actually also thinking, we've been talking about the additions they made. And yes, they've made some real good additions to augment their bench and round out their team. But you also have to take into account the fact that now Kevin Durant has a whole another offseason to better acclimate himself to Golden State, to get better schemes, to work out their system with him more. So, I mean, obviously the first year and the bumps and I think it was pretty smooth. 67 wins is nothing to sneeze at.
Sure.
But also taking that and building off of it for this upcoming season. Hey, against this team, let's say Cleveland tried to get Kevin Durant in switches in space where he had to be a rim defender. And yes, he did a great job with that, but how will Golden State rework it to be prepared for that? And I think you have to take internal development as well. I mean, I would say Steph Curry, Kevin Durant are clearly in their primes. I think Draymond Green and Klay Thompson can make case for too, but they're all right there. And that also counts for even, I would say, more of an addition, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Golden State's 207-39 over the past 3 regular seasons. They're 47-15 in the postseason. Like, when you start looking at the numbers, this has been one of the most dominant runs in NBA history. They've had a really great past 3 seasons, and there's no reason to believe that that's going to change. It's like you said, you add a year, you become more familiar with each other just as basketball players, and you know where a guy's going to be a little bit better. That continuity factor that you tend to forget about, it's just so important. And I honestly think, like, their role players, like Pat McCaw played pretty decent minutes in the finals and played pretty well. He's a wing defender who can knock down some threes. He's going to have another year under his belt. They added Jordan Bell, a player that I'm very high on. And they've talked about maybe moving Zaza Pachulia out of the starting lineup and going with a smaller starting lineup. I don't really see anything that this team's done, even in a small sense, that makes me believe that anything is going to change from last year in terms of their dominance in the league.
I honestly can't say anything either. It seems pretty cut and dry in this case. Only thing, and again, we don't wish this on anything, injuries.
Right.
If that were to happen, how would Golden State adjust? You know, let's say something happened Kevin Durant. Now you have a forward rotation where, Iggy will obviously get starting time. Obviously, Nick Young will get more of a role. And then Omri Caspi. How will Steve Kerr integrate his new additions in the lineup? And also, and this is the only real weakness I can see with the Warriors, but Kerr has a tendency to play with his bench guys a little more than necessary, I think.
Yeah.
Oftentimes to their detriment. Mm-hmm. So I would worry about that.
I honestly think he'll do some of that early in the season. I think that there are a lot of like interesting little tweaks. Jordan Bell, I think, is going to find some David West minutes. They very similar players in terms of what they do on the court. And David West is a very underrated passer, and Jordan Bell's passing has been well documented at this point. But I think that you're going to start to see Pat McCall. You're going to start to see Jordan Bell with Sean Livingston. These lineups of these younger guys starting to take larger roles. And I think that'll probably only happen during the regular season. But I totally see what you're saying, where you start to see 9, 10, 11 players playing in rotation in any given night. I don't, like I said, like you said, like I don't know how much that affects their continuity as a team in the long run, but it is something that I've noticed about Steve Kerr is his lineups can get kind of wonky from night to night.
Yeah, he has moments. I mean, even with Anderson Varejao, that's the last time I remember it happening. And then sometimes with Patrick McGaw and Ian Clark and others, where he brings them in and he goes with, I would say, lineups and situational matchups that don't really make the most sense. And obviously, who am I to question someone of Steve Kerr's coaching caliber? But
I mean, listen, that's the point of the podcast, though. I mean, that's the thing is I brought you on here to question is just bring it, Corban. Like, show them what's up. Yeah.
Yes.
I remember the same thing. Like last year, during the finals, there were a lot of times, and the player that I particularly remember being upset about was Zaza Pachulia. Like, Zaza would go out there and he would just make 3-4 bad plays in a row. And you're going, what is this guy doing? Why is he on the court? And so I think it's little things like that. But I also think that they've got more quality. Like, Ian Clark is gone. James Michael McAdoo is gone. Kevin Looney's lost weight. Like, even these little tightening things, I think, have improved the Warriors a lot.
I agree. And Jordan Bell, I still get so mad at Chicago for that. Why would you bring a lanky rim roller and rim protector on the other end who can slip the screen for lobs and at the same time reject plays and make great defensive plays in space? I don't understand how Golden State just, I mean, I guess, the rich get richer. Because even those little moves, I mean, for Chicago, Jordan Bell would have helped them. And I'm getting on a soapbox here. For Chicago, Jordan Bell would have helped them on a minute level. You see him play, get some minutes. But on Golden State, I don't know, man. They just take all these pieces and they're almost becoming San Antonio Spurs.
Well, and I mean, I'll even take it a step further than that, and I'll say Bell would have been a high quality player in Chicago, and to me, that's what the rebuild. Like, when you rebuild, you want to get as many quality players as you can at any given position, and that's what sort of baffles me about the Jordan Bell thing. Is like, if you watch Jordan Bell play, particularly in the NCAA tournament last year, you watched him in the Combine, and then you saw what he did do playing for the Warriors in Summer League. Like, this is a guy who put quality minutes on the floor, and Chicago needs as many talented players as they can get, because I was looking at their roster the other day, and boy, there is not a lot of talent on there. And I mean, and to further that point, like, also, if Golden State calls you and says, hey, we want to buy your draft pick, you need to find out who that guy is. And I mean,
thank you.
Just pick that guy.
It's almost like when I see if a team offers like a free agent a contract and they're like, oh, would you take a 2-year, $2 million contract? And like, yeah, sure, fine, whatever, we'll take it. You have to really consider, why are they so quick to accept,
Yeah.
Just something to think about.
And there's that old adage about, like, follow what successful teams do. If you want to be successful, do what successful people do, and that carries over to the NBA. Is like, the Warriors are a successful operation. They have developed players from the ground up, And they have done that through quality scouting. They understand player development, all of these things. And maybe Chicago doesn't have that infrastructure, but if Golden State wants a guy, they want him for a reason. And you'd rather just have that guy than 3.5 in cash. I mean, I think. And so, I don't know. That whole thing bothered me. The whole Chicago itself is worth a whole podcast. The goofs that they have made. But
oh yeah,
it is sort of baffling that you would give up on a guy like that and let him fall to Golden State. I mean, Golden State does this every single year. They end up with a guy at 32, at 35, at 37 who's going to be playing quality minutes for him, and that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. It really is, and their offense is such a fine-tuned machine. Their spacing is incredible. Their ball movement's amazing. You keep adding these pieces, incorporating them in their culture. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And what's funny is even not only do they do massive damage on both their half court and their fast breaks, but they led the NBA in fast break points with 22 points per game.
I think Steve Kerr's calling you on the phone, Corbin. I think he.
You know what's funny? I think so as well. He wasn't obviously.
I think he heard what you said about his rotations, and he's calling you on the phone. He's gonna.
Had to press that block button.
Exactly, right? No, you're good, man. You're good. Listen, that's the power of the podcast. That's the outreach. Like, he heard it, and he was like, nah, All right, so enough on Golden State. I mean, I feel like we're going to talk about them all year. Like, it's just going to be whatever. Okay, so let's move on to the next tier. We called it Tier 2, and you and I, when we made our list, we called this tier Threats to Golden State. And that's what I think we believe these teams can be. And maybe not outright. Maybe they're a move away. Maybe it even, in some cases, God forbid, requires an injury. But we feel like these next 5 teams are the teams that could threaten Golden State in the right set of circumstances, right?
Yep.
Okay. So, first team on the list is the Cleveland Cavaliers. Obvious reasons. They've been to the finals 3 straight years against Golden State. They're probably the number 1 threat. But they've totally retooled, so let's talk about that.
All right, definitely. I'm just thinking about where Cleveland was when they lost in that gentleman's sweep and coming back now with the moves they made. I think the first place, obviously, we got to start with is, and it's funny because I don't even want to give the free agent signings of Jeff Green and Jose Calderon their due diligence, but that trade with Boston, I think, really changed the outlook of Cleveland from being the same stale team to a team with some real roster change-ups. And that's notwithstanding Derrick Rose.
Yeah, I think that the Boston trade, and now the news is sort of leaking out, trickling out slowly but surely, that the starting lineup may be shifted as a result of this. So it looks like, or from what I saw today, and obviously this is subject to change, we're still 15 days away from the beginning of the season, but I saw this lineup as the opening night lineup was Derrick Rose, Dwayne Wade, who we'll get into both of those guys, but then it was Crowder, LeBron, and Love. Now that's an interesting change from Tristan Thompson and Love on the court at the same time, and I feel like it's sort of conducive to the way the league has shifted in terms of switching on pick and rolls, playing no traditional center, a lot of guys who can shoot from the outside and be able to defend multiple positions. And adding Jay Crowder is a very underrated move. Now, I'm not the biggest Crowder fan. Even though I'm a Celtics fan, I soured a little bit on Crowder because his scoring is not what you need it to be when you need him to carry the load. But in Cleveland, he doesn't have to do that. So I think a starting lineup, while Isaiah Thomas is out, of either J.R. Smith, some combination of J.R. Smith, Derrick Rose, Dwayne Wade at the guards, and then LeBron, Crowder, and Love at the forwards, is a very interesting switch-up for this team.
I definitely do agree with that. And I'm actually of the opinion that Jay Crowder, he made leaps and bounds from when he first came from Dallas, was basically a side piece in that Rajon Rondo trade in 2015, and through hard work and extreme perseverance, he carved out a spot for himself in that roster. He became a relatively good knockdown three-point shooter. He really made himself into a versatile defensive wing. I give a lot of props to him. I do think he was, I'm not even sure the right word. I think he was typecast into a role that was a little too much for him in Boston, where he was basically, I don't want to say a second banana or a third banana, but he was given he needs to be more of a supporting role than he was given in Boston. In Boston, he was given more of a featured role where he was expected to get at least 14, 15 points a night. And that can be hard for him sometimes. He doesn't really have the dynamic off-the-ball ability to break someone down, get to the rim. He's mostly a standstill corner three-point shooter, maybe a couple drive-in dishes, and that's kind of his offensive playmaking. But as a defender, as a three-point shooter, I think he shot almost 40% from three this past year. He's going to be a killer with Cleveland. They put him in the right role. LeBron James will find him. On defense, he can be part of a pretty lengthy lineup. I like having Jay Crowder, Jeff Green, although he's much maligned, and LeBron as like big, supersized, switchable wings.
Yeah.
Who can take care of the 3 through 5.
Yeah, it definitely gives him a different dynamic. And Jeff Green, I mean, we could spend all day talking about Jeff Green. Jeff Green is what he is, but he can defend. And given that, I sort of put him in that same category that you put Jay Crowder in, of like, if he's not doing too much, if he just does the right amount, Jeff Green's a really good player. And just, like that, those are the kinds of players that have particularly fared well playing with LeBron. Guys like, just off the top of my head, like Shane Battier, Chris Anderson, just guys that probably had too large a role somewhere else, but came to play with LeBron and found the right role. And I feel like Crowder and Green kind of fit into that mold.
I definitely agree. I think it just having them in a culture, in a spot where they have a role carved out for them, they slot in and do it to the best of their ability, I think it augments their own abilities, as LeBron always does with anyone he plays with, but also helps them in their development. I mean, Jay Crowder is, 27, I want to say?
Yeah, I think that's right.
He still has room to grow. He's not capped yet, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean,
it probably is not as high as ceiling, but it's definitely more to his game that I think he can find.
And he can develop into the role, too. Like, whatever they need him to be, he can develop into that. He's certainly proven that. Now, they added 2 other pieces this offseason, and I'm not talking about, like you said, Jeff Green and Jose Calderon. I'm talking about Derrick Rose and Dwayne Wade. Now, these were high-quality basketball players 5 years ago. Derrick Rose, the MVP in the 2011 season.
Oh, man, you took my joke. I was going to say the deadliest backcourt 2011 never
Exactly. Happened. What is left in the tank for these guys? Like, are these good pickups at this point in their career?
On name value alone and the fact that they play alongside LeBron, I want to say yes, but everything, the eye test, the analytics, leads me to believe otherwise. Because at this point, they're both really alike. They're both injury-ridden. They're both tired and worn-out defenders, and they're horrendous outside shooters. And their usage rate is still high. For example, LeBron James was the ball handler for the Cavs last year with a 30.0 usage rate.
Okay.
Last year, Wade had a 29.6 usage rate, and Rose had a 25.7. They all need the ball in their hands. And we're not expecting LeBron, because LeBron is a more than serviceable shooter for his position, for his role, everything. But for Rose and Wade, for someone who needs the ball as much as they do, both being ball dominant, both being, I don't want to say unwilling to play off the ball, but maybe just not having the skill set necessary to do that for extended stretches. It's going to be interesting to see how that works, because with LeBron there's no way you say, oh, Dwayne Wade, you handle the ball, or, oh, Derrick Rose, you take control. When LeBron's on the court, he is the primary ball handler. That's just how it goes. Maybe you give it to Wade to take some possessions off of LeBron, give him some rest. Obviously, Derrick Rose is a point guard, so you need to give him some minutes and some touches as well. But I think it's going to be interesting. I really do, because I will say they make great plays off the dribble, or they're capable still of making plays off the dribble, and they're both still at least somewhat serviceable attacking the rim, even though Dwayne Wade's had some major slippage this year.
Yeah, that's, I think, where you're going to find the most value out of them. I don't know what the grand strategy is of adding guys like this. I mean, I understand the name value and I understand their familiarity with LeBron, or at least Wade's familiarity with LeBron. So I get all that, but I'm not sure in the league the way it is now that you really want players like Derrick Rose on your roster, like guys who need the ball to dominate, who attack the rim, who sort of just sort of like hang around off ball is what I'm saying. You know, like I don't know how much value those guys bring to the team, and it will be interesting to see how they sort of work this in. I mean, particularly when Isaiah comes back, just how the guard rotation will play out. Because if you try to play Isaiah Thomas and Dwayne Wade in your backcourt, you're going to get torched defensively night in and night out. And Derrick Rose is not a tremendous improvement over Isaiah, but it will be interesting to see from a strategic point of view what it means to play some combination of J.R. Smith, Derrick Rose, Dwayne Wade, and Isaiah Thomas as your starting backcourt.
And see, I meant to ask you that. Well, one thing I like to say, no one can point out that the Cavs backcourt will be thin this year. I mean, not bearing injury, because all of these pickups are very injury-ridden. So that is a concern. But if everything goes right, or at least 75% to the plan, they're going to have a very deep backcourt. I don't even think Jose Calderon will make the roster, just how deep they are.
Yeah.
But with the minutes shaking out the way they're going to have to, and I think Derrick Rose will be the odd man out when Thomas comes back. But in the meantime, when you have Derrick Rose there and you have LeBron and Wade now, what do you think about having, and this has been tossed around just a bit since he's been signed, Dwayne Wade playing point guard for at least, I'd say, 20 minutes a game?
Huh.
I see defensive issues all throughout that, but I'm thinking as a way that he can still be a primary ball handler, get some value out of him at the point of attack, and still have room for him to do what he does, which is make plays out the pick and roll at this point in time.
Oh, man. Dwayne Wade, like, even 5 years ago, during the big three in Miami, was a pretty good ball handler. I can't say that I've seen too much of Wade. I mean, what we saw in Chicago, but, like, I don't love Dwayne Wade's skill set in the league right now. I don't know. I mean, it could work. I'm not in the locker room. I don't know. I can't see every day. But I don't think I'd want him playing point guard at this point in the league, because one particular thing, there are so many point guards in the league that are really, really good now. I mean, on a nightly basis, like, do you want Wade guarding, even like setting aside Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, Steph Curry, and even talking about just the younger guys who can give you so many problems, like Kyrie, like Markelle Fultz, like Devin Booker, like, you know, there are just a lot of guards in the league who are going to be primary ball handlers who are going to give you a ton of trouble if Dwayne Wade is your starting point guard, or playing significant point guard minutes, I guess.
And see, and this is what I'm thinking. Let's say you have, and I'm kind of eyeballing this as I go right now. You get a lineup of J.R. Smith, Wade, J.R. Smith, LeBron, Crowder, and Love or Tristan Thompson. I think Love has to start, so I'm going to say Love, just to have some sort of floor spacing on offense. I feel that Wade could play the point guard position on offense and probably hide behind the weaker perimeter option on defense. And you could put J.R. Smith on that point guard, or even switch Jay Crowder down. Well, because I feel like that lineup is pretty versatile.
The problem is, on the defensive end, is that, like, now you have three guys who are basically turnstiles on defense. Like, when you start putting, because that's the thing about Love is, I love Kevin Love. Like, he has that old school skill set of, like, he can post up, and obviously he hasn't done this stuff in a long time, but he's a great post up player. He's a fantastic rebounder, and that's something I just want to touch on briefly. Is I think this makeup of the Cavaliers team is much more conducive to a successful Kevin Love than the Kyrie LeBron tandem. I think Love is going to have a lot more space to operate, particularly if he's the only quote-unquote big on the floor. And I think that, but I think the problem is on defense, where if you play Wade, Thomas, Rose, even JR, if J.R. Smith is the best defender in your backcourt, you don't have a good defensive backcourt. I'm going to tell you that.
You're right. I've been swayed by seeing some actually good active defense from him dating back to the 2016 finals, but I do agree. He is by no means a defensive stopper. You won't mistake him for a Tony Allen. That's for sure.
Right. So one quick thing, we got a million teams to touch on. There's one more thing I want to touch on before we leave Cleveland behind, and it's this. So I think there's a long-term plan by changing the starting lineup and putting Love and LeBron as your starting 4 and 5, and Crowder as your 3, or whatever you want to call it, positionless basketball. I think the plan is in the last 8 minutes of Game 5 of the NBA Finals, and I rewatched it just to be sure, LeBron James was the most dominant low-post player in the game, and it wasn't close. So I think one of the keys that they might sort of try to unlock against Golden State is letting LeBron be the most physical, the strongest, letting him be basically mini Shaq and sort of dominating that interior on the offensive end. And if you have people that can get him the ball or allow him to work off ball or to post up against a skinnier Kevin Durant or against Draymond Green who he can outreach, there's a lot to be said for unlocking a next level of LeBron that allows him to conserve his energy down the stretch. And I think that's something that is sort of underrated that they might work towards, is unlocking the later years LeBron.
I get that. I'm actually with it. It reminds me of what Miami did toward the end of LeBron's tenure there, where they sort of unlocked the LeBron post-up game and used it more and more in the playoffs against the Thunder in the 2012 finals and then more against the Spurs in the 2013 finals, where let's give LeBron room to work. He's obviously a dominant physical specimen who can really get points down there. He is a master at post-up, which is pretty good. You know, for a guy who has an inside game and an outside game as well as he does, all the moves and the footwork and post fadeaways and everything he has at his disposal in the paint is a great asset to have. My only issue is, as you mentioned before, the spacing.
True.
Because if you're going to go with that game plan, then I don't see Wade having that much time. Actually, Wade could still be a good cutter. I do not believe that he lost the ability to cut. I think he lost the motivation. But Derrick Rose will probably be out of the rotation by that point. Wade's minutes will be limited. You're going to really surround him with just a group of shooters, you know?
I think you could do it with the lineup that I had written down to unlock center LeBron would be Love, LeBron, Isaiah, Kyle Korver, and Crowder. So now you have LeBron at his most dangerous with 4 guys who can shoot 3-pointers, which is he's so good at, and it gives you a ton of spacing. And I know that sits down Dwayne Wade, that sits down Derrick Rose. The big names aren't in there, but that lineup can give you such a powerful offensive game that it might be able to overcome the defensive deficiencies that it's going to present.
I get you. More of like an outscore him kind of approach.
Yeah, just let LeBron do his thing where the LeBron 4 shooters lineup, you know, is something that we saw in the finals, we saw it in the playoffs. It's such a dangerous lineup, and that's sort of the maximized version of that. I think it's like the best version of that we've ever had with this Cleveland team.
I can actually agree with that. I think you're right. And who knows, that might be a good approach because they're not stopping Golden State. Even with the moves they made, they can only hope to slow them down for a bit. But if you say, hey, forget that. Let's just try to outscore them. Let's just spread them. Go to work, surround them with shooters, and see what happens. That might be something worth looking into.
Yeah, I think that might be the way they go. All right, let's move on from Cleveland. Let's talk about another threat. Let's talk about San Antonio. Now, San Antonio's flown under the radar this season, didn't make a ton of splashy moves, but they are bringing back the same core that while they didn't do so well in the Western Conference Finals, they were without Kawhi Leonard. How good do you think this team can be? Do you think they've improved? Adding Rudy Gay, I mean, I guess that's their big offseason acquisition, who is going to be out with an Achilles for a while. Tony Parker coming off injury, like I don't know, I don't know what to make of this team because if it were anybody but Greg Popovich, I would count them out. But it's Greg Popovich, so just pencil him in for 55 and a deep playoff run. I don't know.
See, I see what you mean, and honestly, I don't know what to think of them either. I was totally underwhelmed by their offseason moves. I really didn't like it. I thought Rudy Gay was a great move, but that it. I mean, you take out Paul Gasol and then you re-sign him to what I'd like to say is a dubious contract.
At best.
At best, exactly. You let Dwayne Dedmon and Jonathan Simmons walk, and I felt those were very. They put some youthful energy and athleticism into a lineup that is severely lacking of it. So I didn't like that. I thought Dwayne Dedmon played well, and defensively the Spurs made a significant jump when they put Paul Gasol on the bench and had him come off and had Dwayne Dedmon start and really make that impact. And Jonathan Simmons, to me, yes, his jump shot was spotty, but as a defender, active, athletic, had a little bit of an edge to him. I thought he was big for San Antonio.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously, they talk about maybe he wanted more minutes and this, that, and the other, but I don't know, especially with the contract that he got with Orlando. They got a steal.
Yeah, I really liked what Dedmon brought to the table. I really liked what Simmons, just high-energy guys that really changed the complexion of games. And obviously it didn't matter down the stretch because they were without Kawhi Leonard. But those guys are gone now. And so you start to look at the roster, and they still have a host of young players, but you're not sure what the quality is. I mean, so last year they added DeJounte Murray, Brent Forbes, and Davis Bertans. Mm-hmm. All of which played spotty minutes at best, but there were definitely flashes of really high-quality play in those three guys that I saw last year. Now, this year they added Derek White. They added London Perrantes, who may or may not make it out of camp with them, but is an incredibly heady player from the University of Virginia. He was a guy during ACC play who could make smart plays. He could carry the teams for stretches. He certainly fits the Spurs mold, but none of those guys jump off the page to me as ready to make a jump into being high quality, and I feel like that's the problem with the Spurs is that they need one more player who is just good, who can get buckets or who's a stopper or who's a shooter. It doesn't really matter what the role is. They just need one more quote unquote star player to be competitive in the league right now because everybody in the West has improved so much.
They have, and honestly, that's what's making me kind of question the Spurs. You can't bet against Pop, but with all these injuries that they're still recovering from, obviously Tony Parker being out forces Patty Mills into a starting role unless Pop surprises everybody and puts DeJounte Murray in the starting position, which he might do. And I like Murray. I think he's just long-limbed, great athleticism, teaming with potential, not a great shooter at all. And in Summer League, I was hoping that would be better. I was kind of disappointed with the fact that he barely even looked for it. You could see him working and developing. And I think this could be a good move for them as far as giving him extra minutes, throwing him out to the fire, and making him learn on the fly like they did in the Western Conference Finals. But I don't know. I really don't know what to make of it. Paul Gasol, you have to put a little bit of decline on him. You have to just know that's going to happen.
Well,
LaMarcus Aldridge.
I was just going to jump in on the Paul Gasol thing and say, in Eurobasket, when Slovenia was playing Spain, they just kept slamming him into pick and rolls. I think the league knows what to do with Paul Gasol now. I think they've turned away from him being even the dominant player he was 2 years ago. I think that most points he's almost a liability. But anyway, go ahead with what you're saying.
No, exactly. That's the problem. I mean, on offense, he spaces the floor. He's really evolved his three-point stroke, and that's good. On defense, though, he is a turnstile, and one that teams like the Warriors will be focusing on relentless.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's no way, at this point with his age, too, they could just overpower him down there. I mean, I saw Draymond Green getting the edge on Pau Gasol on rebounds and just being out-physicaling. That's funny. But really just making his mark. And that means no disrespect to Paul because Draymond Green's a physical basketball player who really gets down there and works. But Paul Gasol offered no resistance down there, and that was shocking. And now, entering into his 38th season,
yeah.
I want to say, that's not going to get any better.
He'll be 38 next summer. So, he's 37.
Oh, okay.
He's 37 years old. His athleticism is not what it used to be. I mean, we're not talking about Lakers Paul Gasol here.
No. And as a Lakers fan, no.
No. That Paul Gasol, and I was a Celtics fan, so I watched him for 3 years and just hated him. But that was a very incredible player who probably should have won the league MVP. I mean, probably should have won the Finals MVP in 2010. I mean, if I'd have had a vote, that's who it would have gone to. He was the player the Celtics couldn't stop. But that player, talking about the same thing that we talked about with Wade and with Rose, that player's not walking through the door anymore. What you have is 37-year-old Paul Gasol, whose effectiveness is limited, who got exposed by Goran Dragic in those pick and rolls playing against Slovenia, who got exposed in the playoffs last year. I mean, God rest his soul, but Paul Gasol is basically a corpse when it comes to playoff time.
Mm-hmm. No, that's it, and it's sad, but Pop does the best he can in putting him in and getting some reliable minutes out and taking him out just before they really start to expose the bleeding. But that's hard to do because as soon as it comes into the game, stop your game plan. Let's focus on attacking Gasol off the screen and roll.
Yeah.
Let's put him in space and breeze past him. And then if we miss the shot, let's jump over him, get that rebound, put it back up. And that's what happened in the playoffs the last 3 games. The first game, I think he did okay.
Now, Kawhi is one of the best two-way players in the game, if not the best two-way player in the game. That carries a lot of weight, but I feel like they need to develop another offensive weapon this season outside of Kawhi. And I feel like that argument I just made is everything. It's the argument about everything about the Spurs is like, okay, outside of Kawhi. And that's basically what the Spurs are. Outside of Kawhi, who's going to get buckets? Outside of Kawhi, who's going to be a defensive stopper? Outside of Kawhi, and so you keep saying that same phrase over and over, and that becomes the ultimate question for San Antonio is who's going to do things besides Kawhi Leonard?
That's true, and I really want to say LaMarcus Aldridge, but from that playoff series against the Warriors where I thought, okay, Kawhi is gone, and as soon as I saw the injury, I knew he was done. Playoffs, done. It was just too much. But I said, okay, let's focus on playing inside through LaMarcus. Let him dictate the pace, try to make his mark. And mind you, Golden State really did put the pressure on him, make it hard for him to get any shots, the Golden State defense. But to see Aldridge shy away from that, it was points where he didn't even want the ball, where it was Jonathan Simmons and DeJounte Murray really anchoring our offense, where Manu Ginobili had to reach back into the fountain of youth and give us a flashback game in a game 3 just so they didn't lose by like 40. I don't know. I would like to say LaMarcus Aldridge during the regular season. Hopefully Rudy Gay gets back and healthy and in his normal, at least decent form, where he can take some of the offensive load. But that's going to be very interesting.
And then, you got Danny Green, you got Kyle Anderson. There are guys who do stuff, but they're very limited.
Yes, and Danny Green's been so inconsistent.
Yeah.
The past 2 years, I want to say, he's been very up and down. He went from being a knockdown three-point specialist to surprisingly spotty. He used to be, okay, that's going in. Where now, especially last season, I saw a way too many wide-open corner threes where just for whatever reason didn't go in. And it's like a slump. I get it, but it's going on 2 years now where he's, and he is 30, going to be 31, I think, very soon. So maybe age is starting to get his decline in there. He was already a limited role player that San Antonio really used in spots to great effectiveness, but maybe that's it. But I don't know. I wasn't impressed with Green and Kyle Anderson. What have you seen from Kyle Anderson that makes you think, okay, he's going to turn the corner? It's been 3-4 years now, and I don't know.
Kyle Anderson, it's sort of retroactively applied. Kyle Anderson is the poor man's Lonzo Ball. He played at UCLA, same system. He was a great passer. His physical abilities weren't top of his game, but he certainly brought a lot to the game. He could play a point guard like he did at UCLA, or he could defend a 2, he could defend a 3, he could even defend a 4 in college. He's fine, but that's what he is he's fine, I don't know, sort of to put a bow on San Antonio before we move on. I think ultimately there are so many questions about this organization that have to be answered correctly for them to be a contender that it's almost, if you want to look at it and say maybe from a mathematical point of view, if they need to find a second scorer, they need to find a quality wing defender, they need to find that. Once you start looking at it in all the things that they're lacking, it's very hard for me to see a path for this team to be really, truly competitive with Golden State in the playoffs. And they'll probably still win 55 games, and they'll probably still be the Spurs who finish at the 3 seed, and we all go, what the hell? But for me, that's probably what I think most summarizes San Antonio, is the fact that there are so many questions that have to be answered correctly for them to be competitive.
True.
All right.
And that's going to be interesting to look at. But I think that was a good wrap-up.
Yeah. And we could talk about that all day. I mean, but, that's the question for them. So let's move on to the next team in our second tier of threats to Golden State. Let's talk about the Boston Celtics for a little bit. Celtics obviously totally retooled their roster. Only 4 players back from the Eastern Conference champions from the Eastern Conference finalists from last year. What do you think about the new Boston roster and where it fits in the new league?
I think Boston's a very hard team to read. I think if they had came with the same roster they had last season, I could say, okay, they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. They didn't have a healthy Isaiah Thomas. They're going to come back, fine-tune some things. Even that was already a stretch for me because the loss of Avery Bradley would have totally exposed Isaiah Thomas in a way that I don't think we've seen before yet offensively, just his ability to take certain matchups. But once they did that trade and sent him away from Marcus Morris, and then the trade bringing Isaiah Thomas out and Jay Crowder out for Kyrie, they turned into a totally different and more fluid team. I'm not really sure how all the pieces work together. I like Kyrie. I think he can be a decent floor general if, as he says, if he had the opportunity. I think he's had the opportunity. He just looked for a shot a lot more than I think one should. I think Gordon Hayward was going to a team that was pretty sturdy. I think all the parts fit, and they just needed that one star to prop him over. And now I don't think those parts fit as well. Now we're bringing Jason Tatum into the mix and going to give him heavy minutes. That's what's expected. Jaylen Brown's going to have to really show some improvement and some development because they're going to be relying on him some more. Al Horford, can he keep his game together another year? I mean, he's only 31, but as far as picking up and shouldering more of the load, because obviously Kyrie will take over the lion's share, but how will Kyrie and Hayward work together? I'm wondering how that's going to work. I'm not sure. Yeah, Marcus Smart. There's so many questions.
I think you've hit on the names that I sort of circle as the big questions for the Celtics. They need Jaylen Brown to make the leap. Up and down last year as a rookie, they need him to be a quality NBA starter, and they don't have to get much more out of him. But he was the number 3 pick in the draft, and I think a lot of expectation has been placed upon him, and he needs to live up to a lot of that, particularly on the defensive end. Because you have Kyrie, you have Gordon Hayward, and then I think the third starter is either going to be Marcus Smart or Jaylen Brown, but I don't think it's going to be consistently one. I think that's going to be the matchup basis. Sometimes Jaylen Brown against lengthier lineups is going to be the third starter, and then sometimes Marcus Smart is going to be the third starter and is going to slide Hayward into the 3. But I think his development is pretty key to the success of the Celtics. And then the other guy is Marcus Smart. Smart showed flashes last year, particularly in the Eastern Conference Finals, of being a quality player. He needs to be a more efficient player, and he needs to really buckle down and do his job well, which is defend the other team's best perimeter player. And if those two guys can answer the bell night in and night out, I think you'll see a very successful Boston Celtics team because Kyrie plus Brad Stevens is one of the most exciting coach, star, scorer tandems that we've seen in the league in a long time. Brad Stevens is smarter than all of us, which goes without saying. But the way he develops for scorers to get open, what he did with Isaiah Thomas last year, using sets, using screens, using off-ball motion to give Isaiah all the tools to be what he became. I just kind of think Kyrie's a better Isaiah Thomas. And that's no knock to Isaiah Thomas, but Kyrie is one of the most incredible, crafty scorers I've seen in the league in a long time. And so I think that you're going to have a lot of quality pieces that are going to do their job, but it hinges on like 2 or 3 pieces becoming successful for the Celtics to really be what I think they can be.
I agree. And I'm looking at this, and I agree with all your points. I'm only concerned with the bench because, and this is, I feel, understated, but you lose Bradley, you lose Jay Crowder. We're sleeping Kelly Olynyk. Olynyk is gone. Amir Johnson and Jonas Jerebko, and Jonas Jerebko in particular gave some big minutes in the conference finals.
I mean, Jerebko was very underrated playing the 4 spot. Like what he brought to the team was very underrated.
Yeah, and Olynyk was the one who even got them to the Eastern Conference Finals. If you think about that tremendous Game 7
against Washington, yeah.
And so, yeah, exactly. So I'm worried about not only the starters. You can move some starters out. And that is a big change in and of itself. But your whole bench is reworked. And one addition I would like to point out, I do like the signing of Shane Larkin. I thought the dude didn't really have a fair shot from when he came into the league with his foot injury, coming out of Miami. And I felt that, he played with Dallas for 1 year, had that foot injury, got sent to New York, really had inconsistent minutes playing in a system, the triangle, that didn't really fit his style of play. And then went out to Brooklyn for a year overseas. And now, back in Boston, backing up Kyrie, I think, he's only 5'10", yes, but he's freakishly athletic for someone his size. He's a solid finisher at the rim. He is to the rim. He can create his own shot with some step backs and pull-ups. I'm not comparing him to Isaiah Thomas, but I'm comparing him to Isaiah Thomas in the sense of, yeah, he's a smaller guard, but he has a dynamic ability offensively, which I don't think was showcased in his previous stops. But I do feel, as you said, that if anyone will get the most out of him, it will be Brad Stevens.
Yeah, and I feel like Shane Larkin sort of unlocks a whole other side of this. I feel like Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens have placed a lot of faith in guys like Shane Larkin, in guys like Shemi Ojale, in guys like Gershon Yabusele, that there are a lot of question marks about these guys. Now, they've seen them a lot more than we have, and perhaps they understand what they're going to be able to contribute on a nightly basis. But looking at it from the outside in, you don't see a lot of, like you said, that bench talent that was there that can come through in the middle of the second quarter, the middle of the third quarter, and turn a 2-point lead into a 7-point lead, or turn a 7-point deficit into a 1-point deficit. And that was such a strength of the Celtics last year, is to be able to use those bench units incredibly effectively to either increase a lead or decrease a deficit. And I think, so the thing for me is that there are a lot of questions about the Celtics, both on the bench and in the starting lineup, that have to be answered. And I'm not saying they can't be. I'm just saying they have to be answered. These players have to fill these roles if they're going to be a successful team.
I'm totally with that. And that's true. It's going to be interesting to see how Brad Stevens take these pieces and puts them together. And also, you have to give Danny Ainge some credit for his moves. He finally made moves this year, swung for the fence on that superstar in Kyrie. And it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. I am just not completely sold on them yet because they have a particularly King James-sized issue.
Yeah.
That will be something to see looking forward.
That every Eastern Conference team has every year for the past 14. It's like, like
you're right.
When was the last Eastern Conference team that could look over LeBron? Like even when you go back to those Pistons teams or the
I was about to mention
the Celtics teams, like the Pistons, the 48 special in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Celtics got tossed a number of years by LeBron teams. So it's been 15 years since we didn't have to consider the LeBron question when it comes to the Eastern Conference.
Exactly. And again, this only, as you said with the tiers we're doing, this only goes to showcase just how big Golden State is, in that you can look at them and say, okay, individually, yes, no one can stop LeBron, but by committee, they can. And that's a great deal more than any of these other teams can.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that's a good point about Boston. But it leaves so much into the unknown that it's going to be interesting to watch these guys develop. Not the development of Kyrie so much, or Gordon Hayward, or Al Horford, but all the other, tertiary pieces. And as they start to develop, that's going to be very important to the Celtics as a team.
True.
All right.
Totally agree.
All right, so let's go on to the next one, the one that everybody, or at least everybody we work with, has been waiting for. Let's talk about the Houston Rockets. I feel like you're a Lakers fan, I'm a Celtics fan. I feel like we're about the only people outside of just a very few who aren't Rockets fans at 94 feet.
Yes, it's a very, the Rockets run red in 94.
They really do.
94
like,
feet.
it's crazy, man. So I guess we have to be careful what we say so that we don't get jumped in our Slack afterwards, huh?
Most definitely. Got to keep track of that one. I'm worried.
Give me your breakdown on Houston. Obviously, I added Chris Paul. A lot of changes, but what do you think about Houston in terms of their competitiveness in the league?
I really do like the moves they made. I think Chris Paul obviously being the main one, but we also have to look into the other additions they have. PJ Tucker, look Rashad Mbamute. I really like Tarek Black, and seeing how long he's gonna be there.
I was gonna say you would like Tarek Black.
Yeah, I just realized I forgot that they.
Yeah,
I forgot, and that irked me because as a Lakers fan, I was like, yes, find a spot, but nope, just that quick. But those pieces around a James Harden and a Chris Paul add some of that defensive versatility that I think they shipped away when they sent Patrick Beverley and I would say to a lesser extent Sam Decker and Montrezl Harrell to LA.
Yeah.
I definitely think, though, that this team, they already had one of the, as I said, the 10 greatest offenses in NBA history. Just how many points they were able to generate and their lethal pick and roll and the ability to stretch the floor up to 30 feet with Ryan Anderson and James Harden and Lou Williams bombing away and Eric Gordon coming off the bench. And now you keep all of those players sans Williams. You bring in an otherworldly point guard in Chris Paul, who is going to make Clint Capella look so much better with his locks. He already looked good with Harden. Imagine just how much more effective he's going to be creating gravity downhill with Paul and James Harden. They can do screen and you can't stay on him too much because you're going to leave one of a deadly shooter in Harden or Paul alone. And you got to watch out for Trevor Reeves on that weak side, and you have to look out for Eric Gordon. And Luke Rashad and PJ Tucker can both hit a three for you, and they'll lock you down the other end to the best of their ability. So I'm looking at this team, and I think this may be one of the most complete teams Dario Morey has put together.
I think I totally agree with that. That's what I was going to say is this is the culmination of Morey ball. Like this, they've gone out, and Chris Paul obviously not 100% fits the mold of Morey ball because he's a little bit more of a mid-range player. But what they've done is they've created the ultimate weapon for James Harden and now for Chris Paul to be able to run those screen and roll sets, those kick out sets, those rip sets, like all of the things that they did so successfully last year on offense. But I feel like this roster, when compared to last year's, is more complete. Like you said, like I think that when you compare, well, Pat Beverly to Chris Paul, that's a perfect example of they've added new dimensions where the old dimensions failed. Last year they kind of got exposed in the San Antonio series, and that's a lot due to Popovich being the great coach that he is. But some of it was due to player deficiency and upgrading from Pat Beverly, which is somebody I know a lot of people love, and he certainly brings a lot to the table, to Chris Paul gives you a second offensive dimension, and it starts to warp defenses even further to let both Paul and Harden, and then the host of three-point shooters in Ariza, Anderson, Tucker, Mbamute, all these guys who are going to be able to score from three-point range, do their thing in a more warped against a more warped defensive front.
Yep, and I also want to say although Chris Paul is mainly a mid-range attacker, a mid-range scorer, he did shoot a career-high 41% from three this past season. And he knocked down 124 of them, which was the second most in his career.
That's interesting.
So I'm looking at him, and especially this past year, he was definitely more of a sniper. He was the most efficient, as I said, he's been in his career, and he knocked down the second most attempts. So I think if he's in a system where he's encouraged to shoot more, I think a piece just came out, I want to say yesterday that I read, that basically said that D'Antoni's encouraging the Rockets to get their offense in the first 6 seconds. This could be a 7 seconds or less on overdrive right here.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of that in Chris Paul. Like, we've seen his effectiveness and his efficiency in LA, but it seems like Morey Ball emphasizes efficiency so much, just the mathematical efficiency on the three ball. It will be very interesting to see. And I'm going to ask you a question that I'm sure you don't have the answer right in front of you, but I would be interested to know that number on catch and shoots versus shoot off the dribble. Like, I would be interested to see what the switch back and forth is, because I feel like they're still going to let Harden do a lot of the driving of the offense, and so Chris Paul will be able to be a secondary creator. He'll be the best secondary creator in the league, but I think a lot of his attempts are going to come on catch and shoots. And I wonder what his effectiveness is on catch and shoots versus what he probably did a lot in LA last year, which was shoot off dribbles or shoot out of pick and rolls.
That's a good one. I'm trying to look at that right now. But that is a good question. As far as, I think, like you said, most of it was off the dribble just because the Clippers' lack of a secondary creator.
Yeah, that's just who he was in LA.
Year.
Exactly.
Exactly. So he had to look for his own shot. No one else is going to get it for him,
right.
Really.
Anyway, that's my question with them is like, I don't really have a question of how are these two going to fit together. I mean, I know that's been the overarching question when it comes to Houston is how are Chris Paul and James Harden going to fit together on the court, and how are their play styles going to mesh? I don't really have a lot of questions with that. They're both high IQ basketball players. They both want to play with more talented players. I think they'll find a way to answer the bell on that one. But the real question is what kind of efficiency are they going to be able to create from a schematic point of view? Are they going to be able to do the things that Daryl Morey built the roster to do? And at the end of the day, our shot's going to fall because a lot of it comes down to you've created this mathematical efficiency model that is based on a three-point shot, but some nights your three-point shot just doesn't fall. And that's ultimately, I think, one of the biggest questions for the Houston Rockets is what happens when the three-point ball doesn't fall? And adding guys that they added from last year, adding PJ Tucker, adding Mbah Moute, these guys who can defend on the wings helps to answer that question for me. And I tend to agree with you. I think this is probably the most complete threat in the league right now to the Golden State Warriors.
I agree. And I just looked up that catch and shoot stats here. It says Chris Paul, he shot 47%.
Whoa.
On catch and shoot, 49% from three.
Whoa.
Basically, 1 point, but he only attempted one and a half of those a game.
Still, though, I mean, that 50% number.
That's still very high.
That's insane.
Effective field goal percentage of 69.1%.
That's like 1.5 points per possession. Like that.
And that's high. That's higher than DeAndre.
Yeah,
Jordan.
that number's insane. Now, I mean, obviously, as you start to increase the usage of a play like that, the efficiency is going to go down. But man, if he could shoot 40% off catch and shoots, that would be unbelievable.
He was money when able to set his feet and let his shot go, and he has a shot that lends itself. And again, I'm going on the side here. Dwayne Wade, for example, needs to, the way he shoots the ball, the way he starts his dip at his knees and goes up from there, he really needs to take his shot off the dribble to get his feet into that rhythm to shoot it. That's why when he does catch and shoot threes, he shoots such a low percentage because he has to take that dip, and the way his form is, he ends up almost shooting to the side. Whereas with Chris Paul, he's a very compact jumper that lends itself to catch, shoot. The fact he's become deadly off the dribble is just a testament to how hard he works and how good of a player he is. When you see his shot off of a pass, the rare times that it happens, it's money. It's a pretty pretty shallow.
Chris Paul's going to bring a lot to the table for this team. He's going to adapt his game. He's obviously a very heady player. I don't really have any question about that. Like the evolution of his game is going to fit in perfectly with the Morey system. There are just a lot of other questions that I feel like have to be answered for this team. Mostly, are their shots going to fall? And that's going to be the big thing for them is creating situations where when their shot doesn't fall, they can still win ball games. That's basically Houston for me. Is like that. I can sum it up in one sentence, and that's the sentence: is what do you do when your 3-point shot's not falling?
I get that. I got one more for you, Alex.
Right.
Health and durability.
Okay.
If Chris Paul gets another injury or James Harden wears down heading into the playoffs as he did last year, what are you going to do when your two main playmakers, the engine that runs your offense, are either broken down or out of commission? All of a sudden, you're right back to where Chris Paul was last year or James Harden was last year on their respective teams, where they're the lone playmaker with a host of other teammates who are solely dependent on them.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Obviously, Chris Paul's health. He played 61 games last year. He hasn't done the 82-game schedule in a while. It will be interesting to see if they can maintain, or if the ultimate goal will be maintaining Chris Paul's health until the playoffs. In the past 3 seasons, the last time he played 82 games was the 14-15 season, which was arguably the best season for the Clippers, that little Clippers mini run with DeAndre Jordan and Blake Griffin. He played 82 games then, but in the past 5 or 6 years, it's been 60, 70, 62, 82, 74, and 61. So there are definitely going to be some points where they miss a little time. Harden a little bit more durable, a guy who tends to play a little bit more, but yeah, it certainly presents a lot of interesting questions. If that happens, I think probably the answer to it is he'll probably sit 15 games during the regular season, or 10 to 15 games, just to maintain his health into the playoffs, since the ultimate goal is winning a title.
That is. And it's going to be interesting to watch that journey happen this year.
Yep. All right, so let's go on to our last team in this tier. Let's talk.
Oh, my team here.
Let's talk about the Oklahoma City Thunder. Give me the breakdown on Oklahoma City.
Man, Sam Presti, I've said it before, I'll say it again, is a genius. You come in, well, not even a genius. I want to say an opportunist, in the sense that you come in having lost 4-1 to the Rockets, really going and hedging and saying, okay, we're going to really rely on development from the players we had. And that was a Victor Oladipo, a Donatas Sabonis, I'm looking at this right now. Jeremy Grant, lost his name. Alex Abrinas. That was basically the thought process. They're more than capped out heading into the offseason. They still have Russell Westbrook's extension looming over them. Taj Gibson came and actually played some good minutes for us. They were trying to see if they'd keep him, but we knew we couldn't because we had to pay Andre Roberson, who was also a restricted free agent. So you had all of these questions, a whole bunch of questions going into this offseason. And Sam Presti looks around, surveys the field, and just starts making moves. He sends out Donatas Sabonis and Victor Oladipo and brings in Paul freaking George, which already had me jumping out of my seat. I was like, okay, now we have that second star, almost a Kevin Durant light, to play with Russell Westbrook, who is even more accommodating to Westbrook's style of play because he's so comfortable playing off the ball. And then, shortly thereafter that, he signs Andre Roberson to a very good deal, brings in Patrick Patterson to a very team-friendly contract, and Raymond Felton, who will definitely give the Thunder what they did not have all of last season, which was a competent backup guard. And then he goes over here and trades Enes Kanter and Doug McDermott, second-round pick, for Carmelo Anthony, which just boosts their offense, their star power to a whole nother level. And then caps that off by getting Russell Westbrook to sign that 5-year, $205 million contract. Looking at this team, I personally think they have the best chance of staying with the Golden State Warriors.
It has been an unbelievably successful offseason for Sam Presti. After a lot of questions in the wake of Durant's departure about what would happen to the franchise, whether Russell Westbrook would end up in LA or whatever, the past, 4 months since the loss to Houston has been nothing but success after success after success for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And whether you think Carmelo Anthony is a top 25 player or even a top 50 player anymore is sort of immaterial to the argument, because so little got sent out to bring back these two guys in Paul George and Carmelo Anthony that these are huge, huge wins for the organization regardless. This is not like the Kyrie Irving trade. This is not like the Darren Williams trade from a couple of years ago where you were giving up quality assets to get these things back. They gave up Victor Oladipo, who was probably a net negative despite being a quality player because he had 4 years and $48 million left on his contract. They gave up a player in Sabonis who hadn't developed. They gave up a player in Enes Kanter who couldn't play quality minutes in the playoffs. When you look at what they sent out versus what they brought back in, this has to be one of the biggest off-season coups that I've ever seen a team pull off.
I'm in complete agreement, Alex. I'm fired up just talking about them. I am fired up.
I can't wait to see this team on the floor, because outside of all of the questions, just the general manager that is in all of us, the one who just surveys the moves. This was unbelievable to me how well they did, and that doesn't even take into account adding a guy who I'm really high on in Patrick Patterson, who's going to give him a ton of minutes.
Yes.
Inking Andre Robertson, getting his deal done, bringing him back, getting Westbrook's deal done. Just the amount of work that Sam Presti as the general manager has done is unbelievable to me. Now, it remains to be seen what that means to their competition with Oklahoma City. But like you said, and I'm going to let you elaborate on this because I want to hear your take on it, now they have to play with the Warriors, but they seem to have a roster that can do it. So go ahead and give me your take on that.
Right, I'm looking at this roster again and seeing all of the potential lineup situations here. I think they have a versatile roster that can match up defensively with Golden State, can switch 1 through 4, in some cases 1 through 5, and can also provide some offense. And I'm looking, and this is just one I have here. So if you would have Russell Westbrook, Paul George, Andre Robertson, either Patrick Patterson or Jeremy Grant at the 4 and Adams at the 5, or to counter the death lineup, knock Adams out entirely and have Westbrook, George, Robertson, Patterson, and Grant. And just match them up with an absolute unlimited amount of switching. With George and Westbrook on the floor, you have offensive firepower. You can't forget Patrick Patterson is a knockdown three-point shooter. Andre Robertson's good with the cuts, and Jeremy Grant has been developing from both the outside with his shot and his inside game, finishing around the rim. I think the matchups that you can bring in are just unlimited in the type of moves and ways to counteract different teams. If you want to go all offense, you have Russell, you have, I would say, Raymond Felton, Carmelo, Paul George, Steven Adams. Bring them all in. You have 2 decent shooters surrounded by 2 people who could create off the dribble. 1 knockdown shooter in Carmelo who just shoots so efficiently when left open, and a rim roller in Adams. I'm just looking at this roster here, and I'm telling you, it's crazy to me. And the fact that Patrick Patterson is the most unheralded signing, and I think he's the most unheralded next to Raymond Felton. People forget Raymond Felton had a pretty solid year last year backing up Chris Paul. And assuming that the wheels haven't totally fallen off, I feel he can get in there, get the team into some sets, run a pick and roll, knock down a couple of shots, create off the dribble, play some bulldog defense. I'm totally on the Thunder bandwagon. I am, whatever bandwagon that is, I am with them. I really see them at least giving the Warriors something to think about. I'm sorry for going off on a tangent here.
That's what I wanted to hear. Because I wanted to, you have such a passionate opinion on it. I wanted to hear it. Now, I'm not quite as on the bandwagon as you are. I feel like there are still a lot of questions that need to be answered. But one thing that really does encourage me that this team could present Golden State with a problem is that they don't have anybody who can stop Russell Westbrook. Golden State doesn't. Golden State doesn't have anybody who can really guard him. I mean, Klay Thompson can do a decent job, but Russell Westbrook being this hyper-athletic point guard puts them on the back foot when it comes to him. Now, they'll probably just outscore him and do whatever, but now you've added Paul George, now you've added Carmelo Anthony, the weapons start to amass, and that's going to be the interesting question is, how effective can Russell Westbrook be in a situation where they have to play Golden State? And I feel like if they can maximize what he can do against the Golden State defense, if they can give him the room to work, and the big one, if he'll be willing to trust Paul George and Carmelo Anthony to convert when the game is on the line, then the Oklahoma City Thunder will be a huge, huge threat to Golden State this year, as big as anybody is.
And honestly, I'm right with you. That's the question I'm wondering. Because if Russell Westbrook can look around him, see the players he has now compared to who he has last year, and say to himself, hey, I don't have to go for that triple-double every game. I doubt he's going to do that. But I'm saying in the sense that I have players I can trust. I mean, I didn't blame him last year for not shaky Victor Oladipo or do a pick and pop with Donatas Sabonis, whose three-point shooting plummeted after a solid couple of months. Now you have Paul George right there. You have Carmelo on the weak side. Like, you have options that are proven, that can score, that can create, and you have all three of them together. This could turn out really good, or this could be a less catastrophic version of the three alphas of last year.
Yeah, it will be certainly interesting to see them answer the bell and see what they can do against the Golden State Warriors and against the whole Western Conference. I think a lot of their year, and we've been talking about the big questions that each organization needs to answer, I think a lot of their year is hashing out the hierarchy of Russell Westbrook, of Carmelo Anthony, and of Paul George. And I think once they figure that out, they're going to be good, but there are certainly some alpha dog questions that need to be answered. But I think the personalities being what they are, George is a little more likely to be playoff ball. Carmelo is certainly happy playing off the ball if he's playing that Olympics mellow power forward kind of role where he does a lot of catching and shooting. So those are go ahead. Those are the big questions, though.
Oh, that is. I actually had a question for you. I know we're trying to move on real quick, but do you believe in Olympic Melo? I just want to ask your take. I see a lot of different writers and NBA people in the Twitter sphere debate heavily on whether that exists or a player of that caliber can exist in the NBA as far as Carmelo just being a hyper-efficient, thriving offensive option off ball.
I think that he does exist. I think that it's such a mental block for Melo because he was the big dog in Denver. He was the big dog in New York. I think it's just such a mental question for him that if he wants to be that hyper-efficient pick and pop guy, he can be. And he can be incredibly effective in it. But, I mean, it's just a question of want to. Like, do you want to take a back seat? And I think Carmelo finally hit that point in his career, agreeing to this trade. I think that is such a window into his soul, into what he believes his skill set is as a basketball player now, that he knows that Westbrook is the MVP. He averaged a triple-double last year. Like, nobody's confused about what they're getting into with Russell Westbrook as your team's star player. And I think that by allowing himself to be traded to Oklahoma City, he is saying, I'm ready to do whatever it takes to win a title. And to me, that's a very encouraging sign for the existence of Olympic Melo, a guy who subjugated himself to LeBron or to Kobe or to whoever to be the ultimate role player, which is what he became on those Olympic teams. We're going to put a pin in it right there. That's the end of what Corban and I believe are the major threats to Golden State. We'll continue with the bubble contenders on Thursday or Friday of this week and talk about a couple more teams. But until then, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at N1Analytics. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at @the_Alex_West. Make sure to check out the show on SoundCloud, on YouTube, on iTunes, wherever it is you get your podcasts. And check out the Outlet Pass, which is a mini version of the And One podcast where I do 3 or 4 minutes on a single topic. That's going to be a fun thing and a little bit of a shorter, more digestible way to take a look at what's happening in the NBA. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you later this week. As always, I'm your host, Alex West. Good night.